Okay. So there is still 1 minute to go before I can say good evening. But anyway, good evening to everyone, and good afternoon to Joanna and Mara. We have with us this evening Professor ANANDA LAL, who has been one of our major sources of inspiration for many reasons. Uh, Professor, I have already given you the brief wiki page entry on Professor Lal, fearing that I will have to leave out many important information when I introduce him. But for the record and for our listeners, I'll repeat some important achievements, some important contributions by Professor Lal. Professor Lal has been a writer, translator, theater person, and a wonderful speaker, which we will know in a few minutes. Uh, I have to mention that he happens to be the person who authored the Oxford Companion to Indian Theatre, which is the first ever reference work in any language on Indian theatre. He has also edited Rabindranath's three plays for Oxford University Press, which is again another very important work. He has also edited, authored important books like Twist in the Folktale, for which he wrote a wonderful introduction, Shakespeare on the Calcutta Stage, Rasa, the Indian Performing Arts, and he is associated with Writers' Workshop. If I am to talk about the importance of Writers' Workshop, that will probably require a separate topic of discussion, but I'll stop here and I will request Professor Lal to take over the session. Our listeners are, of course, welcome to leave their comments and questions in the chat box. We will address them duly. So thank you again, sir, for joining us. So over to you.
Thank you very much, Devaditto, and thank you for inviting me to this international course. And, some things that I miss, obviously, are addressing a group like this in person. But then always there are some compensations, like having the presence of people from across the world, and of course also across India, taking part, which would otherwise not have been possible. So these are the benefits of online courses. Now, what I propose to do is actually very technical, because I am well aware of the fact that you will all have had substantial experiences of, and in this particular course itself, of speakers who will be telling you about the theory of translation, in fact, theories of translation, various kinds of them, and also analysis of various kinds of translations, perhaps case studies of particular texts. So I will not want to intrude on those aspects. I am going to be addressing certain things that are normally not spoken of in the academic sphere of translation studies, which is the practice of translation. For all practical purposes, this is a hands-on job, but at the same time, this hands-on job does not give it a random, arbitrary quality, which I'm afraid most translators resort to. Because what's happened is that since there is really no intellectual discourse as such in terms of degrees in this area, the most that anyone taking up translation studies can expect is to have some degree of short-term awareness of what are the theories and general analyses of translation. The hands-on aspects that I'm dealing with, actually, I would like to perhaps call them the science of translation. You see, far too much is far too much time and effort goes into a kind of vague, hazy, foggy notion of how to assess, evaluate translations. And because of this vagueness in which almost anything is possible and anything goes, a lot of people have a certain disrespect for translators. Precisely for this reason, because there doesn't seem to be any methodology being applied. It is almost like, I feel like I can translate and therefore I translate. One of the best examples of this kind of translation actually is the great Rabindranath Tagore himself, because he turned to translation simply because he felt that he didn't have the inspiration to write creatively at that particular moment in time. Therefore, let's translate. Now, this, of course, is absolutely the wrong way to translate. If anything, the translator's job is even more difficult than the creative writer's, because the translator has to look forward and backward. The translator is in this position as an intermediary where they must do justice to the original author and the original text, and at the same time get across to a target audience who might know very little about the original text and original author. So what we have is a situation where we are told these things in theory, but how do we actually practice the methodology of translation? That's the focus of my lecture. I will break it up into two halves. So we will pause after 40 minutes or so and give you a little space to, if you have any questions, maybe raise them, put them in the box, and then I can kind of deal with them. And then I'll go into the second half of the talk. The same thing will apply. We will have questions for the second half or the whole lecture afterwards as well. My basic principle is, like I said before, the translator as intermediary. This is something that is actually quite commonplace in translation studies. People call it by different words, by different phrases. But the term that I have used more and more of late is that the translator is the transparent. Why is the translator the transparent? Because firstly, this is obviously a pun, you will understand. Firstly, the translator is parenting a text to grow up and reach a different society outside. Also, the translator must be transparent themselves in terms of transparency. So the translator themselves should not put themselves up in front. I mean, it's almost as if the translator is transparent, seen through. So the reader reads the author seeing through the transparent translator. And this also has a different aspect to it, because in terms of transparency, what I expect every translator, every good translator to do is to give the reader, the target reader, a full and honest and transparent account of the methods that have been applied. in the translation. Most translators don't do that. Certainly in India, they do not. They look the other way, and as I've said, they take translation as a hobby. Okay, I am not feeling up to doing some serious work today, so I will translate a poem. Now that, of course, is the wrong attitude, approach to translation. The second principle that I argue always for is that the translator has to be faithful. It's an article of faith that the reader is entrusting you with being faithful to the text and therefore to the reader as well. In other words, you as a translator have no right to edit. You have no right to interpret beyond what is there already in the text. Yes, it's true. A translation automatically becomes an interpretation, but you must not impose your own interpretations visibly in the text that you are translating, in the translated text. Let me, for instance, give you an example. All of you have seen the film Oppenheimer, or at least you should have. It's a great film after all. And there you remember the place where Oppenheimer quotes the Bhagavad Gita. All of you are probably familiar with those lines. Oppenheimer says, the quotation that he himself, of course, had read in that translation that he read, the English translation of the Gita, was, "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." Now, this actually is an interpretation. For those of you who know Sanskrit, you will understand that the term for death in the Gita, in the Sanskrit, is not death, is kala. Kala means, in virtually all Indian languages, time. Now, someone who changes the literal word time to death is clearly interpreting. Of course, you can say that kala in one of the definitions in a dictionary, ultimately, if you go down the definitions one by one, you will find that, yes, kala actually, like for instance, when we use in Bangla the term kal shah, it actually implies death. Because after all, what does kal do? What does time do? It brings death along. But that doesn't mean that the first meaning of kala is death. So, for instance, when my father translated the Mahabharata and the Gita, he would use this other method whereby he would have a compound translation. So he used the term cosmic kala time. Now, you'll understand that for Sanskrit this is possible, because Sanskrit itself is a compound language. So cosmic hyphen kala hyphen time actually comes closest to the concept of kala as not just time, but a cosmic force, an entity in itself. And you can do that in a language like Sanskrit, for a language like Sanskrit. So this is the fidelity that I am trying to get at, that we should all try and practice. Another thing that we very often fall into that we shouldn't is applying European, Western terminology for an Indian text, where the European vocabulary or terminology used actually comes from a specific social or political context, which doesn't apply in India. I'll give you an example. We were talking about the Mahabharata, so many of you will be aware that Professor Van Buitenen of the University of Chicago had started on this project of translating the Mahabharata and did several volumes, several parvas of it. Parva is the term used in Sanskrit before he unfortunately passed away. And in that translation, for whatever reason, he used the word, the chivalric European word baron, Baron, very often for a Kshatriya or a leading warrior. Now, this you mustn't do. You mustn't do simply because it's from a different context altogether. A baron is not an Indian word. So you're transferring an Indian text and word to a European word without any reason to. It's better to use the original if necessary, or translate it more literally. Use the original word and maybe footnote it. So these are what very often I come across, and I need to kind of reiterate them at the very beginning of this lecture so that you are aware of where I come from in terms of my approach to translation studies. The first thing that I would like to deal with in terms of practice is vocabulary itself. Therefore, if you look at the handout that I gave you, Essential Tools for Translation, most translators, in fact, are not aware that, and I'm referring to, of course, in Bangla. Now we are not talking about Sanskrit or Hindi or any other language anymore. We are coming to Bangla proper. Most translators are not aware that they should have these books handy. What are these books that you need before you even start on the process of translation? The first thing is the best English dictionary that's available. Now, if you are in the United States of America, you will go by Webster's. If you are in British Commonwealth or the Commonwealth countries or UK English, then you will go for the Concise Oxford. And the Concise Oxford or the Webster's, in its latest edition, there is no need for you to keep older editions of dictionaries in your bookshelf. Please redistribute them to whoever you feel needs them most. As a translator, and of course, even before translator, as a student of literature, you must have the latest dictionary. There's no question about that. Now, why do I say Concise Oxford, which, by the way, is in its 12th edition? Soon it will probably come up with the 13th. In fact, I don't know whether they will come up with the 13th, because the 13th is an unlucky number. And besides, nobody's buying books anymore in hard copy. I'm, of course, joking. Please forgive my mad jokes. But at the same time, 12th edition is the latest. The COD is a standard one-volume dictionary. I am not asking translators to go to the complete Oxford, which is massive, which is volume after volume after volume. In fact, that has gone online. Right? I'm not asking you to do that simply because your readers are lay readers, common readers. You mustn't expect that they should look at the entire Oxford dictionary online. So confine yourself to a standard one-volume dictionary, and I would say the COD, Concise Oxford Dictionary, is the best for the UK English reader. Likewise, for Webster's, the Webster's Collegiate, latest edition, is the best, one volume. In other words, why do I emphasize one volume? If a word is there in that one volume dictionary, you can use it as a marker, as an index of that is within the common English spoken and written across the world. What is the practical purpose behind this? Very simple. If you find a Bangla word or Indian word there in either of these dictionaries, you don't have to italicize or use diacritical marks on it. And you will be amazed at the number of words of Indian origin that are in these one-volume dictionaries. Therefore, if those words are available to the English reader in a one-volume dictionary, you can be rest assured that the English reader will recognize them, will not worry about having to look it up. And if, for instance, there are such words that we don't know in these, that we ourselves don't know in these one-volume dictionaries, it's okay. This is just a marker. You can look it up online and you will get your result automatically. But there's no need for excess italicization of words that are there in these dictionaries, English words. In other words, they are English words, they're not no longer Indian words only. For instance, dharma, karma, nirvana, right? Now, if these are there in your Bangla text, you have a very simple job whereby you don't have to spend 1 hour arguing with yourself, what is the word for dharma in this particular paragraph of this particular Bangla text? No, you don't have to worry about whether it's religion or whether it's doctrine or whether it's this or that. Don't translate it. Just use dharma. It's there in English. So use the English word, right? And there are many such words. Believe me, you will be, I mean, words like whether it's chapati or paratha. Now, these, of course, you remember, we'll come to that in transliteration. They will be spelt very often in a way which is understandable to the English reader. So if you are going to be transliterating it as Parotha, because that's the way a Bengali would pronounce it, you will lead your reader astray. Go for the spelling that has been accepted in English, because that is what you are aiming at. You are trying to communicate to your reader in English. Right. Besides the two dictionaries that I've listed for you, there are two other dictionaries. Those were of course in English. There are two others in Bangla, which you should have if you don't already. One is obviously the Bongyo Shabdokosh, which is the 2-volume Sahitya Academy dictionary, which probably most of you do have. But if not, please do buy it because it's reasonably priced and it's a wealth of information. Secondly, the other one, Bangala, that's the way it's spelled, Bangala Shabdokosh, by a very erudite Pandit, Yogesh Chandra Rai Vidyanidhi. This is a book that I am not aware is in print right now. I might be wrong, but if you are able to get it, it was originally published by Bhurjo Patro. Please get it. Even a slightly, bookworm-eaten copy is worth its weight in gold, because this man did a wonderful job of compiling Bangla words from various contextual etymologies into that particular dictionary. So these Shabdakoshes, the two of them, for Bangla to English translator, are absolutely essential. That's for the lexicography. Now, think in terms of culture, because the act of translation is not simply the act of transferring words. It's not simply the act of transferring a literature. It is actually the act of transferring culture. Be extremely sensitive to this, right? You are in a highly, in one way, dangerous situation, because you are, after all, the spokesperson for that particular culture when you're translating. And therefore, there's a huge deal of responsibility on your shoulders. Very often, you will find in Bangla literature, And not, I mean, by Bangla literature, I also mean non-fiction. I don't necessarily mean only fiction and prose and drama, but also a lot of biography, a lot of non-fictional prose, history that is out there that needs to be, for instance, translated if it hasn't been translated already. And much of this has to do with a shared cultural background, which most, I emphasize the word most because not all Indians share it, but at the same time, you have to be aware of the nuances of cultural terms and words, vocabulary. Now, in the second part of that list that I've given you, you will notice Monier-Williams, the Sanskrit English Dictionary. This is by far the best such dictionary, and it has come into, it has been so useful for me in my work that I always recommend it because, I mean, you don't have to know Sanskrit. As long as you can read Devanagari, Hindi, you will be able to read the original word, and then the definitions and explanations are all in English. Right. So this is, for instance, where I learned for the first time that when I was, for instance, translating Tagore's Raktokaravi, because I was convinced at that time that he was actually choosing names very carefully. The heroine, quote unquote, of Raktokaravi is named Nandini, and that's fine. That's a very common Bangla name, and it's in fact a very common Indian name, of course. But the thing that I didn't know until I actually opened the entry on Nandini in Monier-Williams' dictionary is that way down, maybe definition number 12 or 15 or 20, I've forgotten. But it says, as some of you are probably aware, name, N full stop, name of Durga. Now this blew my mind. Those of you who are aware of the Durga Puja rituals will realize that indeed, Nandini is one of the names that is in fact invoked in the pandals during the puja rituals. And so it cannot be that Tagore didn't know this. You have to give such a great author, and all great authors like him, the benefit of the doubt. That is to say, he knew. And consciously, therefore, he is adding to the common meaning of Nandini with a small n, which means daughter. Some of you are probably aware of that. In Bangla, Nandini means daughter. So she's a generic daughter, but she's also Durga. So those of you who know the plot of Raktokaravi will immediately recognize how you can interpret her as Durga. Right. So these are things that you will pick up only if you consult somebody like Monier-Williams or the next person, Vettam Mani, who is an Indian, whereas Monier-Williams was British, but both of them share the same fascination for encyclopedic knowledge. You know how some Indians are, they kind of get totally obsessed by one particular area. And that's what this Pandit from the southern India, Vettam Mani, had done. He put together this massive Puranic encyclopedia. So if you want to know in very brief synopsis, what happened to any particular episode or storyline or character that has been mentioned by any Bengali novelist or whatever the case may be, read up Vettam Mani. You'll get a very brief, in English, storyline of what happened in various, either the Purana or the Mahabharata or the Ramayana or various other things that he's taken into account in that particular book. So these are essential. Also, there is Madhusrava Dasgupta's Sanshad companion to two different books, to the Mahabharata and to the Ramayana, which you get, it's easily accessible now. And recently I have noticed that there is a website, Wisdom Lib, Lib for library, wisdomlib.org, which is doing exceptional work in giving us that kind of cultural material. I have actually often tried to find out who are the backers of this particular project, but my detective skills have failed me so far. So, but anyway, whatever, I mean, that's not so much a problem. It could be a problem, of course, I realize that. But from my own consulting of it, I have been extremely helped by that particular portal, because it leads us to all kinds of allusions, references that we would not otherwise have been aware of, including, for instance, I mean, not just mythological or religious names, but Ayurveda. And by the way, religious, not just Hinduism, but Buddhism, Jainism, everything kind of comes into its survey, its domain. So why are these actually, why am I even mentioning these? The thing is that you have to be able to give your target reader, whom you have to assume does not know Indian culture, material that helps the target reader to understand the text that you are translating. Right? So that material comes in the form of footnotes or glossary. You can't avoid it. If you're translating from, I mean, think about it this way. If you are translating an ancient Greek or ancient Latin text into modern English, you will still need footnotes. How many of us actually, or how many Europeans know Greek mythology that well? So think of now Indian culture being transferred into Western language and literature. Therefore, you will need not just that level of annotation, but more. Yeah. Without, of course, necessarily having to overdo it, because the reader, the present day reader, doesn't like too many footnotes. And of course, publishers also don't like that too much either. But at the same time, you will realize that there is a need for this. When I talk about, I've generally speaking, I gave a minimum of 2 or 3 lectures on translation in order to do full justice to the various aspects of it that are required. When I talk about the different dimensions that need to be translated in a text, I mentioned 3 things. The text, of course, which is in print in front of you, the source text, which you are translating. Next comes the context. The context is not printed in the source text. The context is what you have to translate along with your translated text. The context means things like I just told you, the culture. Now, for instance, the Bengali reader will not need to have a footnote on Durga, will not need to have a footnote on Ramzan. Yeah, but the target reader, the other language reader will need it. So that's the second aspect of the text. In other words, the context that you are going to be having to translate. And then the third aspect, the subtext. The subtext is important because it's not just the literal meaning, but very often there are subconscious, unconscious, subtextual vibrations, echoes, that we might be picking up as first language readers, as mother tongue readers, which are between, literally, it's the phrase between the lines. So those subtextual subtleties also need to be transferred. They don't have to deal with culture necessarily. It's sometimes very often just um, a simple word like the negative na, added on to a sentence. And that becomes a problem in translation, because then you have to kind of translate it. Sometimes it'll take you 3 or 4 words to translate it. Like, isn't that so? Don't you think so? Whereas in the original, it's just na. So these are 3 different aspects: text, context, subtext. And subtext is even more important for me, because as a drama translator, theater people are always actors are always taught about subtext. How do you convey subtext? It's like body language. Body language is not coming across to you in a printed book. Body language comes across to you when you are sitting with another person in front of them, and you are able, because we are human beings, we are social animals, we are able to recognize certain things that are not being spoken, that are not being said. That is subtext. So these are things that, of course, I moved out of the cultural background, and just to kind of explain what I meant by the entire area of context, which also needs to be translated. And alongside that, of course, is subtext. And then the third part of that initial, the first handout that I'm referring to, equivalence of flora and fauna. This is the most neglected, if not ignored, aspect of Indian literature, Bangla literature in translation. Let me put it very bluntly. Most of you have no clue about Indian flora or fauna, because we have lost all that. We have become urbanized to the extreme that we cannot tell one tree from another. We cannot tell one animal from another. We cannot identify a common bird. That is our fault. We better rectify ourselves. Yeah, it's not the fault of Rabindranath, who knew these. It's not the fault of Jibanananda, who knew these, and these are writers who use these names. It's not the fault of Vibhuti Bhushan, whose fiction is loaded with so many references to flora. It's our fault. So we must make amends. If you translate, as one person, in fact, a long time ago, we had this debate in my university. One of Tagore's songs had been translated. The word in question was dhan. Dhan had become wheat in English. And there was a very famous professor who was telling me in this open debate that what's wrong with that? If it's in English, what's wrong with wheat? Because, it's a grain for them, which is equal to the meaning of the word dhan for us. No, that's not the case. It's simply not the case. So you have to use rice or paddy, depending on the context, in order to be absolutely accurate. And accuracy is what is required. BBC has this regular feature called Verified Live. You might have seen this in BBC News. I want all translators to do their verification before they use words which are inaccurate. We owe this to the reader. Yeah. So the books that I have recommended for you, these are many of them now actually are available in PDFs. So you are probably going to be able to access them fairly easily. The Useful Plants of India, which doesn't, I mean, of course, I'm talking about Bangla, but that particular book applies to many in other Indian languages as well. Because what, I don't know if you are aware of CSIR, the Council for Scientific and Industrial Research. It's a government of India body. And these are scientists primarily. And what they've done is they've put together a botanical A to Z by the genus name of the plant, that is to say, the Latin name, the botanical name of the plant. And under every species, they have gone out of their way to try and locate the Indian names as well. So I'm interested in that. I'm not interested in anything else. I'm interested in these identifications. So that you have the Sanskrit, the Hindi, the Malayalam, the Telugu, the Bangla, indigenous vocabulary for those particular plants. They have an index also, so you can look at the index. Sometimes it's not very methodically kind of arranged in terms of the spellings, but you'll have to figure it out yourselves. As a one-volume book, it's quite marvelous. Online, we have a source like flowersofindia.net. I don't know if you've seen that. It tries to do the same with Indian names for specific flowering plants. You can look it up and find out how much work, actually how much good work has been done in this area. Handbook of the Birds of India and Pakistan, the OUP book, is by the formidable Salim Ali, whom all of you have probably heard of, along with his the scientist who worked with him on this project, another ornithologist, S. Dillon Ripley. The two of them brought out 10 volumes of all the books, of all the birds in the South Asian region, where, once again, I mean, I'm also interested in the text of these fascinating entries because there's so much humor in the way Salim Ali writes, but for a translator, this is important because it gives you the Indian names of many birds, right? For instance, many of you don't know, may not even know actually the national bird of Bangladesh. Normally, I would address this to the entire group in class, and somebody would take a guess, but I'm going to tell you right away, it's the doel. The doel, which is a very common Bengali, it's very common in Bengal. And most people would not know its English name. Its English name is magpie robin. Now, you have two choices in front of you. You can either use the word doel. If you like that sound, use it, italicize it. Or you can use the English equivalent, which is magpie robin. Perfectly all right. There are some birds that don't need, like for instance, koel, kokil is the koel, K-O-E-L. It doesn't need italicization because that is actually an accepted English word, right? There are many such examples. I don't want to kind of unnecessarily go into illustrations over here, but you get what I'm trying to say. Like with Sanskrit to English dictionary, we have another Pandit over here, K.N. Dave, who's written a wonderful book called Birds in Sanskrit Literature. And you may or may not know this, but our great Sanskrit writers of ancient times knew their birds very well, which we don't. Right? So those words, and sometimes they're different names for for the same bird, Dave has analyzed and given us the English names. Likewise, we have semi-scientific or popular science organizations like BNHS is the Bombay Natural History Society. They have brought out the Book of Indian Animals. They have brought out the Book of Indian Reptiles. All of these with the Indian names in those respective entries for those uh, animals or reptiles concerned. Typically, for instance, I mean, you may think this is not particularly relevant, but uh, why? Why should it not be relevant? When, for instance, somebody like Bibhuti Bhushan uses the word Chandrobora, which is a specific snake, why don't we use the English equivalent, which is Russell's viper? Yeah. Now, it's up to you. You can use the original Chandrobora, but then you will have to, of course, footnote it as the Russell's viper. Yeah. Again, I'm just kind of off the top of my head giving you certain examples. Repeatedly, you will come across, yeah, this is actually an interesting example that I'm going to suddenly came to my head in Bangla literature of the mammal by the name of bham. Right. Now, a bham is a civet, civet. Okay. However, it has a humorous connotation, which is very often, for instance, what I'm talking about by way of subtext or context, which is if the phrase concerned is Buro Bham, then it's not referring to a civet at all. Right? You can figure out for yourselves, and by now you probably are aware of that phrase, how you would actually translate that. But it's interesting because you may also want to footnote it, that bham, in fact, is a civet, but Buro Bham means something else. Right? So on. This is by way of the essential tools that you need to have handy beside you at all times when you translate from Bangla into English. Let's pause for a few minutes and I will take your questions if they haven't already been answered. Let me know, Devaditto or anybody else, if there is any question that we should.
Yes, I directly go to the chat box.
Yeah.
There are a couple of interesting questions.
Yes.
Joanna has asked the first one. In terms of methodology of translation, can we talk about Sanskrit poetics? Pilal, in his introduction to Shakuntala, talks about the importance of dhvani in transcreation.
All right. So this is actually something that deals with theory. But from what I have just told you about, it comes into the area of subtext. All right. Dhvani. Dhvani means echo, means resonance. Literally, of course, it means sound, but it's kind of reverberations of sound. Right. So now it's up to you what you want to do with the particular dhvani of a particular word that you feel, you sense as dhvani. All words do not necessarily have dhvani. And especially today, a lot of fiction has no dhvani whatsoever. Dhvani typically was conceived of, conceptualized at a time when literature was primarily poetic. So we are in a different time where hardly anybody reads poetry nowadays. But true, if you're taking up a fictional work by Rabindranath, be sure that there is dhvani somewhere over there. Yeah. So how you would translate that particular dhvani of a particular word or phrase is your choice. Of course, you have to be sensitive to it. As a student of literature, you have to be sensitive to subtlety, which might reach the upper level of sophistication. Dhvani can be highly sophisticated too. Hopefully that answers your question. I'm not very sure.
I've been thinking more about Ananda Vardhana theory of Duanyak's suggestion. I remember this beautiful example given by Purushottam Lal from Bhagavad Gita, when actually the whole teachings of Krishna are finished, and he says to Arjuna, "Yate chasi tatha kuru," right? Which means do as you wish.
Yeah.
This is on the, I would say, this obvious, I would say, level.
Superficial.
But what is implied is kuru is like to do in Sanskrit. So do as kuru should do. So follow dharma. So what I'm trying to say, because that was very beautiful for me and incredibly inspirational when I read it in this introduction. But there are such breakthrough points in works of imaginative power that must be translated, but they are enigmatic and they have this deep layer meaning. And what I've been thinking, what I thought that actually Sanskrit poetics, I don't know if you agree with me, allows to address this deeper layer. And that's why my thought was that actually that the Sanskrit poetics, especially Dwani theory, could be kind of a methodology to translate properly the text, to take this deeper meaning into the target text and target audience also. I don't know, what is your opinion, sir? Because this is very interesting for me.
Yeah, Joanna, in principle, that's fine, but it might lead to insanity on the part of the translator.
Okay. Okay.
I'll tell you why, because if you look for Dhwani everywhere, you'll go mad. Yeah. So there can only be a certain limit to what you find in what particular text. Otherwise, you know the classic instance of we as students of literature, you have 2 lines of the original Shakespeare text on the top of the page, and 50 lines of annotations on the bottom of the page. And therefore, you begin to laugh at this, don't you? Right? So there has to be a balance. So let's not overdo this. I entirely agree with you. Obviously, for Sanskrit, there has to be an understanding of Dhwani, just like, for instance, the entire aesthetics of rasa. Dhwani is at the literary level, but rasa more at the, let's say, performing arts, but also literary level. You understand what I'm saying. These are extremely important for us to understand if we are to translate that particular text, that particular language. But I am actually not referring to Sanskrit so much. By all means, you can apply the same principle to Bangla. Okay. But the Dhwani in Bangla literature is going to be confined to only those writers who are highly sophisticated writers of Bangla. Like, for instance, among those that I referred to you, Jibanananda, for instance. Now, you will get that Dhwani because that's not just a suggestion, but it's also about assonance, sonic effects. And what do you do there? I mean, you can try your best to replicate it without sounding very funny yourselves in translation. Yeah, because English doesn't allow for too much of that, because after a certain point, it becomes a little too funny. You know, there is a difference in tonality between Bangla as a language and English as a language. Yeah. English is much more stiff upper lip. But Bangla is going to be much more emotional to the extent of becoming sentimental. Yeah, so now it's a good question ultimately, because how much of that sentimentality will you retain in your English translation? Then your reader will say, oh, no, this is becoming too much. Oh, woe is me, boo-hoo, etc., etc. I want to stop reading here. But, your job as a translator is to be as faithful as possible. That particular Bengali audience loved it for all that it gave them, including the sentiment. So it's your job as translator to kind of convey that as much as possible. Yeah. So
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much.
I'm moving away from it, but just to give you another analogy of a similar sort of line of thought. Yes, Devali.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Sir, that was a wonderful interaction. I thank Joanna also. Devanshu's question is slightly different. He's particularly asking about some possible strategy that Khaled Hassan opted for while translating Tobatek Singh into English. So, do you want me to read out this one, sir?
Well, I mean, it's fine. Hypothetically, we can deal with it, but we're talking actually about Bangla. So you're talking about
Yes,
from
yes,
Urdu to English, right?
yes, yes.
Yeah. So go ahead, and let's see if we can handle it.
Sure, sure. Devanshu is actually wondering what kind of strategy Khaled Hassan maintained while translating Tobatek Singh into English for maintaining the transparency as a translator. I mean, your take on this.
Oh, okay. So now see, here is a problem. I have to confess that I do not know the original language. Right? If I don't know the original language, who am I to comment on it, on the translation? Right? You can only comment on a translated text's methodology if you know the original language of the source text. Then only can you analyze it.
Absolutely, absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. Relatedly, Devanshu had asked something about why the things that we should do while talking about translating words like gamcha, piri, but I think this has been addressed.
Yeah, I mean, very simply put, you can,
Yeah.
of course, retain the originals and then annotate them because you must. Or if the gamcha or the PD is not too significant in that particular story or wherever it might be, simply translate it to its closest equivalent. Right?
Absolutely, absolutely. Jyotirmoy Ram has a different question on transliteration.
Yeah, we'll come to that later.
So I'll reserve this for later, I guess.
Yeah. If I haven't addressed it, then we can definitely deal with it then.
And Omlan has a very particular question on your translation of Rakta Korobi.
Oh, my translation. That I can comment on.
Yes. So Omlan wants to know, while translating Rakta Korobi, what special features of the text do you keep in mind in terms of translating such a brilliant script? So, Omlan, if you want to interact as well, we have some time.
Well, I mean,
Yes,
the
sir.
first thing I've already, let me just kind of explain what I've already said. At least one principle is that fidelity. All right. I will push I've said as much in my translation in the method that I've applied. I will push the target language to as much length as possible to get the original meaning across, at the risk of people might think that, okay, this is a kind of contortion of the target language, but I'm willing to do that if I feel that I'm getting the original flavor across better. All right. I will not edit or ever feel that the English reader will not be able to understand my translation. I will never, in that sense, condescend, because this is a kind of condescension. It assumes that the English reader, because of the unfamiliarity of the original text, will not accept our translation of it. Why? Why should that be? We should not have to quote unquote sanitize or polish or clean up any Bangla text to make it presentable on a silver platter to an English audience or any other audience. In other words, I am arguing for translation that wants to meet the reader halfway. The reader has to come towards me halfway. I have to go towards them halfway. All right. The reader is reading Dr. Korobi or Red Oleander with the mindset that I am willing to enter this world. Right? That's what I'm assuming in the reader. So I will go out of my way to be as faithful as possible. Yes, Omlan, can you, if you want to kind
Yes,
of...
yes, thank you for your response. And I will add one more question to you, that while translating a script, as I am also engaged in a theater group, I'm translating scripts.
Yeah.
What do you keep in mind? Because the subtext that you were talking about, that's very important in theater.
Yeah.
So in a text like Rakta Korobi, there are such moments, many more.
Yeah.
You itself know. So
Yeah.
what about translating them to a foreign reader? That
Right.
thing puzzles me. So please.
Yeah, this is the second aspect of translation, which applies to translating a performing text. Right. Ultimately, this is a play. Therefore, the language has to be spoken to be understood. Yeah. It's not meant for the. It's not meant primarily for the reader. It is meant primarily for the spectator or the audience in the theater. So my test at all times for a dramatic text in translation is, can it be read out and understood perfectly? Does it work when it's spoken? That's the test of that particular text. Right?
Thank you, sir.
That is what you have to keep in mind.
Okay.
Now, again, what happens is, which I mentioned in my introduction to Red Oleander, is that I am giving the entire text. What you, the theater group in London or New York or Sydney, wherever the group might be in English that wants to do it, what you do with it is your business. Yeah. Now, that 4-line dialogue, which gives you everything, you may want to chop to 2 lines. You may want to delete that entirely. It's the same principle as we do with an original play in Bangla. When we stage it, we don't keep the entire original text, because for every performance, it changes. For every production, the text of a play will change, because the director has their own vision. They will want to perhaps highlight certain things and delete maybe an entire scene. But if we as a translator delete it for them, that is wrong. Our job is to give everything. Then let them decide what to delete. Amlan?
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir, for your response. That suffices.
Thank you, sir, and thank you, Amlan, for raising the question. Now we have a question from Srita. This is, I think, one of the perennial troubles while discussing these things, but I thank her for raising the question. Srita জানতে চাইছেন ভাবানুবাদ আর আক্ষরিক অনুবাদ।
সীতা জানতে চাইছেন আবার বলো।
ভাবানুবাদ এবং আক্ষরিক অনুবাদ, এই দুটির মধ্যে তাহলে কোনটি বেছে নেব? মানে আপনি যেহেতু ফেথফুল
আক্ষরিক, very simple, no question about this. আক্ষরিক অনেক হয়েছে। 150 বছর ধরে ভাবানুবাদ, মানে as literally what that means is I feel this, so I will translate it as I feel. That is ridiculous. All right? It cannot carry on any further, because we actually get disrespected as a result of that. Across the world, internationally, everyone is translating faithfully. Whether that's from Japanese to English or from any other language into English, faithfully, with introduction, annotation, and references, whatever is required. That is a solid translation. So all this airy-fairy bhavanubad, this is absurd. Forget it. The biggest culprit, I have to say this, is Rabindranath himself. Gitanjali ki chilo ar Gitanjali uni ki korlen. those of you who know both languages will easily be able to say, and that you will say is Bhavanubad. It is, right? It was Bhavanubad. But he is the great Rabindranath. You are not. Okay? He can do whatever he wants besides to his own work because it is his. He can tear it apart and rewrite it. He's done that several times. Okay? But as a translation, it won't work. Simply because it was Bhavanubad. আমি ভেবেছি যে এই পংক্তি বা এই প্যারাগ্রাফটা ওই জায়গায় দরকার নেই, বোঝাও যাচ্ছে না, আমি অত সময় নষ্ট করব না, বেসিক্যালি ইন ব্র্যাকেটস দ্যাটস হোয়াট ইউ আর অ্যাকচুয়ালি ইমপ্লাইং, নষ্ট করার ওরকম সময় নেই, আমি বাদ দিয়ে দেবো। দ্যাটস এ ডিসগ্রেস, রাইট? সো প্লিজ ফরগেট দ্যাট টার্ম। অলরাইট? ইয়া,
একেবারে অন্তহীন তর্কের বিষয়ে আমার মনে হয় এ নিয়ে আর না এগোনোই ভালো।
এটা আর তর্ক নয় আসলে, তো আসলে আমি বলি এটা আর তর্ক নয়, এটা শুধু আমাদের দেশেই চলে। কারণ আমরা we have become, I'm sorry, আমি বাংলায় কথা বলছি, but we have kind of become stuck in a 100-year-old discourse, and we're repeating that again and again and again, but the world has moved on. Right? The world of translation has moved on, and we must be aware of this, and we must try to get the advantages of it and emulate the best translators.
একদম। আমরা এবার একটু অন্য ধরনের প্রশ্নে আসছি। সুরভি খুব সুন্দর একটা প্রশ্ন তুলে এনেছেন। when Bengali poetry uses repetition for rhythm or emotion, যেমন উনি একটা উদাহরণও দিচ্ছেন, জেগে জেগে থাকি, how do we retain its musicality? Surovi, if you want.
This actually depends on the original text itself. If it is a poem or a song, right, you are probably compelled to keep the rhythm. So you should repeat. Repetition in poetry is not a flaw. Repetition in poetry is called a refrain, which is a poetical device. So feel free that if the original has meter and even worse rhyme translate kora khub mushkil, but try your best. Yeah, you should not be afraid of repetition. But if it is happening in regular prose, then you don't have to. I mean, it's your call. Yeah.
একদম। স্বস্তিক হাত তুলেছেন। স্বস্তিক,
শোনা যাচ্ছে?
হ্যাঁ,
হ্যাঁ, মানে একটা জাস্ট কমেন্ট, যে শব্দগুলোকে বললেন যে একই রেখে দেওয়া, যেমন গামছা বা পিড়ে, ঠিক সেইভাবে অন্য ভাষার, বিশেষ করে যেখান থেকে আসলে লিটারারি থিওরি মানে বিশেষভাবে জন্মেছে, ফ্রেঞ্চ সাহিত্য থেকে, যেখানে এত বড় বড় যে থিওরিস্টরা হয়েছেন, তো তখন তাদের থিওরিগুলোকে অ্যাকচুয়ালি ট্রান্সলেট করা হচ্ছে, সেক্ষেত্রে অনেক শব্দ হয়তো তৈরি হচ্ছে, জাস্ট কমেন্ট হিসেবেই বলছি। আবার আমাদের বাংলায় শিবাজী বন্দ্যোপাধ্যায় যখন প্রবন্ধ লিখছেন, তখন মানে অসাধারণভাবে তিনি কোনো না কোনো একটা সাবস্টিটিউট বের করে আনছেন, উদাহরণ দিয়ে হোক বা ব্যাখ্যা করে হোক।
প্রশ্নটা কি?
না, জাস্ট এ কমেন্ট, মানে প্রশ্ন নেই, মানে বলতে চাইছি।
না, শিবাজি আমার বন্ধু, শিবাজির বিষয়ে আমি কিচ্ছু বলবো না। মানে না, আমি ঠাট্টা করছি, কিন্তু আসলে ব্যাপারটা হচ্ছে যে শিবাজি knows what he's doing. There are two ways of tackling this. If you're translating theory or criticism into a different language, there is always the possibility to use the original word and then explain it. ইংরেজি থিওরি ইনটু বাংলা, অরিজিনাল শব্দটা ব্যবহার করে, প্রয়োগ করে, তারপর যদি, যেমন শিবাজি অনেক জায়গায় করেছে, কয়েনেজ একটা তৈরি করা, নতুন একটা শব্দ, তারপর সেই শব্দটা ব্যবহার করা। আমার মনে হয় সেটাই হচ্ছে বেস্ট পদ্ধতি ইন দ্য কেস অফ ক্রিটিক্যাল or theoretical material. Original শব্দটা থাকুক, তার পাশাপাশি you can create your own terminology. A good illustration here is the French word différence. Right? Now, সেটা আমরা কিন্তু যখন অনুবাদ করেছি বা অন্যরা ফ্রেঞ্চ থেকে ফরাসি থেকে ইংরেজিতে করেছেন, তারা কিন্তু ডিফারেন্সটা রেখে তারপর আবার ট্রান্সলেশন করেছে। That is the best procedure.
একদম নন্দিনীদি একটু অন্যদিকে আরেকটা দৃষ্টিভঙ্গি আনছেন আর কি। If I cannot translate rhyme into rhyme, should I desist from translation? What do you think?
No, I don't agree with that. Again, there are two ways of approaching this. You declare at the outset that the original had rhyme. I, as a translator, am incapable of matching that, and therefore I have not used rhyme. The other way is to try your best to rhyme. Very often you will not be able to succeed that much simply because in English there are not that many rhymes as there are, for instance, in Bangla or in the Romance languages, so-called. Rhyming words আমাদের ভাষায় এবং Romance languages এ অনেক সংখ্যা বেশি. English doesn't have that. So what do we do? What do I do, for instance, in such cases? I try to maintain rhyme. I often resort to half rhyme. Half rhyme, you know what half rhyme is. Not a perfect rhyme, but a kind of similar vowel. All right, so the reader gets the sense that there is a rhyme over here. Or assonance.
Probably just give a hint of it.
Some kind of sonic effect, but you're already explaining in the introduction that this has rhyme, but I cannot always match it. Therefore, I may not be able to, or whatever. You use the words that you feel most appropriate.
But then there are some poems which rely heavily on rhyme. Maybe it's a good idea to leave those aside, would you say?
If you can't do it, then don't try it. True. But for me, that's been a challenge.
Okay.
আমি বাংলা থেকে about 150-200 কবিতা বিভিন্ন লোকেদের কবিদের অনুবাদ করেছি, and I've always taken it as a challenge. Let's see what I can do. What's the most that can happen? People will hate this translation. ঠিক আছে, কি এসে যায়, আমি তো চেষ্টা করেছি. Other people might say that, all right, okay, this comes close enough. Now see, you will never get 100% equivalence. If someone says that it's 80% there, it's 90% there, wow, that's great. Please understand that যারা পড়েন তারা বেশিরভাগ কিন্তু দুভাষী বা ওরকম বাইলিঙ্গুয়ালিজম নয়. That's why they're reading it. আমি যদি বাংলা জানি, আমি অনুবাদ পড়বো কেন? So you are actually getting across to the non-Bengali.
Yeah, I like the idea that I hint at the rhyme even when I can't actually rhyme. Actually maintain the meter. I think that's a very good idea. Thank you so much.
By the way, meter you can. That is another way of dealing with it.
I maintain the meter but not the rhyme.
Exactly. Because meter is relatively easy for us to maintain.
Yeah.
Right.
Thank you so much.
একদম থ্যাংক ইউ নন্দিনীদি ফর রেজিং দ্য কোয়েশ্চেন। সঞ্চিতা একটা অন্যরকম নিজের একটা চিন্তা আপনার কাছে শেয়ার করতে চাইছেন regarding what she wants to do, and she is also a practicing translator. I would just like to share one of my recent contemplations as I came across and started pondering, much because of my recent interests and involvements in translation studies, the curious linguistic cases like translating Raat Dupur or Din Dupur. We know what the equivalent will be.
Curious?
Raat Dupur or Din Dupur. Curious linguistic cases like translating Raat Dupur or Din Dupur. We know what the equivalent will be in English, but we are losing linguistic morphemes and popular cultural codes in such cases. So she is expecting your comments on that.
Yeah, no, that what I said before about this kind of thing is that obviously in this case you shouldn't go to the original word and keep it in diacritical marks in the text, because that will ultimately become nonsensical actually. So what you should do is you should convert it, transform it into a phrase that you think will convey the meaning in context, in that particular context. Right. For instance, I mean, height of midnight or something. I'm just thinking off the top of my head. So you think of something that is similar, close enough to it, right? Or just simply translated it as in the middle of the night or something like that. That would be a more ordinary translation, in the middle of the night. These are contextual things that within that particular paragraph, this phrase has occurred. How do you tackle it? You cannot be too literal over here, because it becomes nonsensical, as I say.
So that takes care of the chat box, sir. You can proceed.
Oh, okay. Questions took a long time. Well, let's move ahead to the 4-page transliteration chart that I've given you. This is simply because everyone's got that.
Everyone has, but if you want, I can share it.
No. I don't need to see that. Since everybody has it, they can refer to it. And in fact, hopefully some of them have already seen it and can ask me questions about it later on. These 4 pages are something that I worked on for the Rabindranath's 3 plays that I translated, because I felt it was essential. Since remember, transliteration is also in the context of drama, it needs to be heard. So transliteration becomes more important depending also on not just the way it is spoken in Bangla, but also the language it is being staged in. Right. Now, to give you an example, if let us say Prakta Korobi was staged in Punjabi, all right, you will immediately recognize that if you were to pronounce the Bangla words that you have retained in the translation as Bangla, in Bangla, you will alienate the Punjabi audience, right? So why would you say in Punjabi, why would you say Nondini? You would have to say Nandini. That gets across immediately. It's the same word, right? So that's the point of transliteration. Now, this particular chart I have also used in my more recent book, which is Rabindra Songit related, Songs of Tagore, that was published by Routledge. So, because I find that it works very well, because it has the scientific background of linguistics as well. Over here, those of you who are familiar with the IPA can probably read those. And again, not just those of you, but any reader can immediately identify those as these particular sounds. So this, of course, the transliteration chart over here that I've given you derives from Sanskrit's transliteration chart into English, which was perfected by the Europeans. Not just the British, by the way. The French also contributed. The transliteration chart that they gave to Sanskrit texts, Indological texts, all kinds of historical texts and philosophical texts, mind you. One of the biggest areas of translation was philosophy. These all used variations of this particular transliteration chart. And because Bangla is descended from Sanskrit, it fits that particular chart reasonably well. There are only a couple of exceptions, which some of you must have noticed, which I don't have to point to, but you can, if necessary, we can talk about that as well. Now, I am not saying, don't get me wrong, I am not saying that any translation from Bangla into English that you do today must have diacritical marks. I'm not saying that. But you must be aware that there is such a system. Yeah. And then you can adapt it as long as you use it systematically, consistently. You cannot change things around because that is unscientific. All right. Let me step back and give you an example of what you and we normally do today over WhatsApp or email. Okay. I or you, we are conversing over WhatsApp messages, and very often we are using Roman letters, English letters for Bangla words, right? Okay. Now, suppose one of you sends their partner, girlfriend or boyfriend, the case might be, the message, Ami toke, all right? Acceptable, I hope. Valobashi, VALO. All right. Your partner, spouse, girlfriend, boyfriend, whatever the case may be, will know exactly what you're saying. All right. Now you use VALO in a different context. You use the same spelling and send it to your Marathi friend, and they will not understand anything. They will think actually it's a different word altogether. Right? So what we do amongst our own linguistic community is not my problem. It's perfectly okay because we understand each other, what we are typing out by way of short form, abbreviated messaging, right? But if we are going to be translating, we cannot transliterate bhalo as VALO. We will have to use BHALO and A with a macron over it, bhalo. Okay. Only then might it get across to other related languages. Even then it might not get across. But remember, your primary purpose is to communicate to the non-Bengali, not to the Bengali. Right? So transliteration becomes extremely important because what we are doing then is we are alerting, especially if you're doing it into English, then we're alerting the reader of that English translated text, whether they are in Kerala or in Kashmir, to a commonness of vocabulary, which they may or may not know. But 30 to 40% of the time, if you transliterate properly, they will understand the word. Right? Shadhona. Now we as Bengalis, we will immediately in English translation, we will say SHADHONA. Right? But the minute you translated it accurately as SADHANA with a macron dash over sa, na, perfectly understandable from north to south, from Gujarat to Manipur. You take your chances. You take your choice. What would you rather prefer? Communicating in translation to your own community or communicating to the wider world out there? That is what translation is about. We are human beings trying to give the richness of Bangla to people who do not know our Bangla Sahitya. So we again have a responsibility in this. Try to reach out to them using their terminology, And this is the way that I think works best. By the way, transliteration, the diacritical marks that I've given you are normally not accepted by popular publishers. I am saying normally because I've actually come across books, let's say published by Penguin, for instance, that use diacritical marks, like the ones that I've given you. So there is practice of this, even in the popular market, the popular publishing industry. But by and large, diacritical marks are the domain of academic, scholarly publishers, university presses, right? Or academic / scholarly publishing. They will have no problems with diacritical marks. By the way, nobody should have any problems with diacritical marks because thanks to technology, you can get all these diacritical marks on your keyboard. In MS Word, all you have to do is go to symbols and it'll give you everything. I mean, it has symbols for hundreds of diacritics in languages internationally across the world. After all, you understand, in Eastern Europe, there are many Slavic languages which use all kinds of diacritical marks that the English reader doesn't know. Yeah, but they carry on using it. So we should also, where the publisher permits it, allows it, we should also be ready to do that. Where the publisher doesn't want to do this, all right, then you have to kind of enter a negotiation process with the editor concerned or the publisher concerned that, look, please, at least, I appeal to you, at least give me one diacritical mark only. And which is that diacritical mark? The macron over the A. That is the only diacritical mark I insist that publishers allow. And then the editor might say, all right, we can do this. And by the way, this has happened in my experience. When Shukanto Chaudhary was editing the Cambridge Companion to Rabindranath Tagore, he had asked me to contribute as well. And we were discussing diacritical marks, and he was saying how the publisher, mind you, Cambridge University Press, doesn't want to use diacritical marks. All right. So I told him the same thing that I've just told you. Please, Shukantada, please plead with them that give me at least that R. And they agreed. You see, that is the one thing that differentiates in Bangla or A, and many occasions of O which turn into O in Bangla. I'll give you a case in point, my own name. My first name is Ananda. All right. Now in Bangla, you're free to translate it as A-N-O-N-D-O, Anondo. That's the sound, isn't it? Right. But you will alienate every non-Bengali. Correct? They will not understand what it is that you're trying to say. So you use the macron over the first A and then use A and A later on. A-N-A-N-D-A, Ananda. With the macron, the dash over the first A. That you should insist on. That's the simplest way of transliteration that you can utilize, you can apply. By the way, those of you who want to follow this up further, you can go to Wikipedia and look up Hunterian transliteration. Hunterian is Hunter, H-U-N-T-E-R-I-A-N. Hunterian transliteration. And you read it and you'll find out exactly what I've been saying. They have simplified the chart that I've given you. They've simplified this because actually that's what is happening in a lot of official documents that the government puts out. They are applying Hunterian transliteration. The names of railway stations are applying Hunterian transliteration, where you can't obviously use too many diacritical marks. People will get very confused. This is for the common person. Apply Hunterian transliteration if necessary. Right. Now, if there are any questions about transliteration, please go ahead, because I realize that I've almost reached the end of my tether or my tenure. So you should have. Sorry, Devaditya, শোনা যাচ্ছে না।
সরি, এখন শোনা যাচ্ছে স্যার?
হ্যাঁ হ্যাঁ হ্যাঁ, এখন better.
To be very honest, I guess I will speak on behalf of most of us. We don't feel like ending the session, but I know time has its limits. But
I'm available. So Devaditya, if you want me to continue, I can continue. All right. So tell me.
Please do. Please.
Let's take the questions. Let's take the questions first.
হ্যাঁ, ট্রান্সলিটারেশন সম্বন্ধে যে প্রশ্নটি এসেছিল, আমি চলে আসছি। ওকে, ইয়েস, জ্যোতির্ময়ের প্রশ্ন। জ্যোতির্ময়, ইউ ওয়ান্ট টু ইন্টারাক্ট? প্লিজ গো অ্যাহেড। Okay, I guess he might be facing some connectivity. Yeah, Jyotirmoy, please.
You said about that translators must not impose their own interpretation visibly. So how to avoid the error in it?
Which error? Can you explain
this interpretation
more?
This own interpretation while transliterating or transcreation.
See, this is not about transliteration. This is about translation. Yeah. Now, let's face it. Let's accept it that all of us as translators, because we are readers, we will have our own interpretation. As we are translating, we are also interpreting. As readers, we do this. Now, our ideal situation is where we try to detach our own self from the translatorial action. Therefore, try to be as objective as possible without interpreting. Right? Interpreting means what? For instance, let me put it in as kind of crude a way, perhaps, as an example as possible. You take text by, let's say, somebody like Bankim Chandra, all right, or even better, let's say Michael, all right, and then you, because you yourself have leftist ideology, you may be a communist, you impose that interpretation. Jyotirmoy, you get it?
Yes,
I hope you understand, because you should not let your own personal ideologies color the translation. Michael didn't intend it. Bankim may not have intended it. Oh, obviously, Bankim hasn't intended it, right? So the question doesn't arise. So why are you interpreting it in that form? That's the thing. You have to become as objective, detached as possible. Let the text speak for itself.
okay, sir. Thank you. Got it.
Transliteration?
Okay. এই একটি প্রশ্নই ছিল স্যার।
ও আচ্ছা আচ্ছা, আর কারোর কি ওই ধরনের প্রশ্ন আর কোনো কি আছে ট্রান্সলিটারেশনের বিষয়?
আমার মনে হয় আপাতত সেরকম কারো প্রশ্ন নেই। উই ক্যান মুভ অ্যাহেড।
তাহলে আমি ওই জায়গাটাই আরেকটু এক্সপ্লেন করি। কয়েকটা জায়গায় from Bangla to English you will face this crisis of consistency. In other words, for instance, let me give you an example. Jatra. What do you do? Because in Bangla, Jatra is obviously not Borgirjo. Because Borgirjo is J, very clearly. You must have seen the transliteration chart. Cho, cho, jo, jo. All right, so J is over there. Now here we are using the Sanskrit origin word yatra and pronouncing it as jatra, right? It is spelled with a, obviously, those of you who know the alphabet, the Bangla Horop, without the dot under it, which we pronounce as jo. So what does one do? In such a situation, you are in a fix because it will be inconsistent of you to write J for Borgio jaw and also use J for this jatra. Hence, for jatra, where the publisher allows diacritical marks, I use Y with a diacritical mark to differentiate it. Because please understand that apart from Odia and parts of Assam, no other Indian language will understand jatra. They will understand yatra, which is the same word as far as you're concerned in translation, right? So think along those lines, all right? Not V when the transliteration is actually BH, paw, paw, baw, paw. That's BH. Remember, our alphabet is very scientific. Every consonant is aspirated by the next consonant. There is always a aspiration, H after the previous consonant. So it's highly scientifically arranged. Anyway, I don't want to get into that aspect of it, the sonics or the linguistics of it. So jatra is one of these. Another one that I often find very commonly nowadays being used by all of you, not me. Bhalo I will say, but I won't say fool. All right. Now let's take the analogy a little further. As I said, you are writing to your partner, girlfriend, boyfriend, whatever. You've done that with bhalobashi. All right. Now, suppose you say this. I know you won't, but suppose you say this to me, Tumi, in a message, right? Fuler moto, Fuler. All right. And he or she misinterprets that you are calling him or her FOOL. Okay, I know that this is a joke, right? But the thing is that Ho is aspirated, is PH. It must never be replaced by an F unless, yes, there is an unless the word is Islamic in origin. Got it? In that class of vocabulary, you will often have an Islamic word that is being spelt with a paw. And nowadays, even for instance, Anandubajar Potrika is using a dot under paw to indicate that this is a F. Understood? Then you can use F. In other words, paw with the put key with a dot under it becomes F. All right? But paw just by itself is PH. There are some other such, sort of these things happen with every language. The differences between the three shaws, Donto Shaw, Talubo Shaw, Mudano Shaw, which in Bangla sound have become more or less the same. Right? We pronounce them the same way, whereas they are not the same originally. as if, in fact, if you go to any Brahmin Purohit Pandit, they will be able to actually pronounce it the way it was originally pronounced. But we have done away with that. That's by in terms of speaking, in terms of the sound. But remember that since there are those three spelt with those three different sibilant spellings, we should try to match those particular alphabets. So Dantosha will always be just S. And Talibusha, if it's conjunct, will remain like in Sruti, will remain SR, but by itself can become SH in English transliteration. And Mudhanusha always SH. All right. So these things will happen, but the main thing in applying diacritical marks or transliteration is to be consistent. And applying a consistent system so that your target reader, who is, always remind yourself, a non-Bengali, can understand the word better. Okay. Any questions?
হ্যাঁ, আমরা প্রশ্ন পাচ্ছি সঞ্চিতার থেকে। সঞ্চিতা, if you want to interact, maybe. মানে সঞ্চিতা অনেকগুলোই প্রশ্ন লিখেছেন, সেজন্য আমার মনে হচ্ছে ইন্টারাকশন করে নেওয়া।
Yes, good evening, sir.
Yes, good evening. হ্যাঁ, বলো। একটু জোরে বলতে পারবে, বা কাছে যদি মাইকের কাছে যদি চলে আসো।
হ্যাঁ। Am I audible now?
হ্যাঁ।
I've just given a comment here that Bengali aspirations, places and manners of articulation, they have actually been significantly influenced by English phones of closer similarities, like the bilabial Bengali phones. They have become labiodentals, and the aspirated ones, they have become the fricatives, like much that you were talking about for, bilabial for becoming for. So this PH and this F. So that is the linguistic information, the bit of that I just wanted to highlight.
Okay. It's very good that you raised this, Sanchita, because let me tell you this. Always go, since we are translating, right? Always go by the printed text. Do not go by the way the words are spoken. By আমরাই এরকম ভাবে হয়তো পশ্চিমবঙ্গে বা পূর্ববঙ্গে একই শব্দ কিন্তু আলাদাভাবে উচ্চারণ করি। We are aware of this, right? So the pronunciation, the উচ্চারণ of a Bangla শব্দ is not uniform. So always go by what is printed, the spelling that is printed. So forget about the F unless ko has a dot under it. If ko, another case in point, if ko has a dot under it or kho has a dot under it, remember that these are also coming from Islamic vocabulary. Therefore, you are free to use Q for that kind of printed letter. Got it? But do not go by sound simply because the same Bangla word is pronounced differently in Purulia and differently in Chattogram. Correct?
Yes, sir. Absolutely. Got it.
So just forget sound. Go by spelling, printed spelling. আচ্ছা, তোমাদের একটা উদাহরণ দিই। আমি নাটক রিভিউ করি। I review a lot of plays. Obviously, most of them are in Bangla since I'm located in Kolkata. তো এক সময় নান্দিকারের ফেস্টিভ্যাল হতো, এখনো হয়, আর বাংলাদেশ থেকে there were these groups that come from Bangladesh. তো আমরা তো নোটিফিকেশন পাই যে এই দলরা আসছে, এই নাটকগুলো হচ্ছে। তো একদিন আমি দেখলাম একটা নাটক বাংলাদেশ থেকে আসছে, আর সেই নাটকের নাম হচ্ছে, আর এরা তো ইংরেজিতে ট্রান্সলিটারেশন বিজ্ঞাপন, তখনকার দিনে বিজ্ঞাপন হতো, দে আর গিভিং ইট ইন ইংলিশ, দি অ্যাডভার্টাইজিং ইন ইংলিশ। It's advertised as HAT, hat, HADAI. Alright, hadai, মানে ম্যাক্রন তো ব্যবহার করবে না, so actually confused. So I kept thinking, এটা কি হতে পারে? Hat তো হবে না, unless it's some kind of absurd comedy or something like that. তার মানেটা কি? হাত হতে পারে, কিন্তু I didn't get it. নাটকটা দেখে বুঝলাম। তোমাদের মধ্যে কেউ কি এটা বলতে পারো? HADAI, what is this actually in Bangla, from Bangladesh?
হারাই টারাই নয় তো?
না নন্দিনী,
হদাই মানে সব সময়।
আসল বাংলাটা কি বলো? আমরা কি বলতাম? সদাই, এক্স্যাক্টলি। তার মানে পুরো নামটা বলো। হ্যাঁ,
সব সময়, সেই অর্থে
না। HAT is what? Same principle?
Hut.
No.
HAT.
হ্যাঁ,
সদয় স্যার বলতে পারি, সদয় মানে দয়াযুক্ত।
সদয় হয়। ইয়েস, সাদিকুল
স্যার সদয় বলতে দয়াযুক্ত, দয়াবান, এমন কোন দয়ার সঙ্গে বর্তমান সদয়?
না, সদাই আমরা সব বুঝতে পারছি, আমরা সবাই বুঝতে পারছি, কিন্তু তার আগে হলে কি হবে?
সিলেটের কিছু ব্যাপার, মানে সিলেটি বাংলার
ব্যাপার তো বটেই, সিলেট এবং চট্টগ্রাম।
তাহলে আমার বলতে পারা উচিত, কারণ আমি সিলেটি। কিন্তু
then please tell me, HAT means what?
জানি না।
HAT means what? Same principle. আপনি তো বললেন
বাজার সদাই কি কিছু?
না, আপনি তো বললেন যে হদাই নয়, সদাই। কারেক্ট। Therefore HAT means what?
বুঝতে পারছি না।
সাত সদাই হয়ে গেল হ্যাট হদাই। Now I'm joking, but you understand that from that remote part of East Bengal, remote bolte mane remote noy, kintu it is Silet, Chattogram, ওই অঞ্চলে ওরা বলবে হাত হদাই, just like in Ohomia. In Ohomia, the shaw becomes a haw very often. Like Ohom itself, it is actually Oshom, but they spell it Ohom. They pronounce it Ohom, right? So, তারপর নাটকটা দেখে আমি বুঝলাম যে এটা হচ্ছে সাত সদাই। So, by no means should you use uchcharon, pronunciation, to transliterate. Go by the printed text. Printed texte সেই ইস্ট বেঙ্গলের টেক্সটটা কিন্তু সাত দন্তস্বয় আকার ত, সদাই দন্তস্ব দয় আকার রসই। পরের প্রশ্ন আসছেই না, রাইট? Forget pronunciation. Forget what we are doing to the Bangla Bhasha. We are massacring it. Once again, I'm joking, all right? Because we need not be massacring it, simply because all languages do this. All languages go through this process of breaking down, moving into a different area. The English pronunciation I am speaking now comes from a very remote, tiny part of England, focused in London, Oxford, and Cambridge. The original inhabitants of London were Cockney. You know that probably. And the Cockneys did not speak English the way I'm doing to you now. No. The received BBC pronunciation is what I'm speaking. Right. So sound is different from Sahitya. That is the big paradox that you must realize. The printed word is what you have to follow if you are translating. এখন এটা হতে পারে যে তোমরা লোকসঙ্গীত translate করবেন. That creates another level. If that ওই গানটা যদি ছাপা না থাকে বা না হয়, then you have to actually transliterate first by writing it down, transcribing it, then transliterating it. কারণ ওই গানটা গাওয়ার সময় শব্দগুলো অন্য ধরনের হবে, তাই না? So you will have to actually make a printed text or written text of this and then transliterate.
Sir, I'm sorry to interrupt at this point, but I think if possible, for our listeners like Joanna, সিলেটের ভাষার ক্ষেত্রে এই যে আলাদা what you are saying just reminded me of two very favorite, very close to my heart sort of songs. মধু হই হই বিষ হাওয়াইলা আর কইলার ভিতর গাঁথিয়ে রাখুন তোমারে। এই ভাষাতে যে ধ্বনির ব্যাপারটি সিলেটিতে একটু আলাদা হয়, এটা যদি একটু ছোট্ট করে বলে দেয়, because I could see Joanna was kind of surprised about this.
No, you see, I mean, this is always the problem when there's an official received spoken language or dialect, and all the other dialects under that umbrella of that particular language, which are variations, variant or deviant from the received pronunciation. So, in fact, there are people, Joanna might know this, there are people who argue that a dialect, I'm still calling it a dialect, but there are people who are arguing that Sylheti is not a dialect, but a different language. So these are things like, probably many of you are aware of the various languages which are under the Hindi umbrella. You are probably more aware of that, more familiar with that. In fact, there is no such thing, I might get arrested, sorry Devaditya, there is no such thing as the Hindi language. Why? Because every North Indian region, apart from Punjabi, that's a separate language, Kashmiri, that's a separate language, but every other so-called Hindi-speaking region, of course, they do speak a common Hindi. Yeah, but their own mother tongues are different. They're Awadhi, they're Bhojpuri, they are all kinds of Bundeli. These are all put under the Hindi umbrella. This is some people call linguistic appropriation. Other people call it, because this is history, you can't do much about it because of the influence of, for instance, Hindi film and then Bollywood. There is a certain kind of nationalized Hindi speech or language that everybody in the north and maybe other parts of India also speak. They can communicate in. But the original languages of each of these regions are very, very, very different. They are related. Yeah, but they are actually in the census of India, and very often the linguistic census, they are enumerated by their originals. They're listed under their original names, not necessarily under Hindi. So I don't know if this is getting across to Joanna, but the similar thing, phenomenon, is what you will find in Bengal too. I mean, it's a simple thing. We talk about the Shamajare Shoshi Babu or Sosi Babu, or whichever way you want to talk about it. These are jokes, but the shaw becomes a saw, and the saw becomes, and the shaw becomes a haw, elsewhere. So these are things we are aware of in literature and linguistics, and it is applicable to all languages. Yeah. I am pretty sure that Joanna, you are from Poland?
Yes, sir. Yeah, I'm from Poland, yes.
We'll find similar things with Polish, from North Poland to South Poland, from East Poland to West Poland. There will be slight variations in accent and pronunciation.
Yes, like in the south of Poland, the language is influenced by Czech language, and we have an accent on the first syllable, whereas normally we have on the second from the end.
Yes. This is exactly what we are saying. Same thing applies to Bengal. In any linguistic region, the boundaries are a blur. All right, so Sylhet and Chattogram are in the eastern edge of Bengal or Bangladesh.
Right.
The boundaries blur because there it mixes with Assamese, Ahomia. And so the sounds are very similar. This is right. In the westernmost districts of West Bengal, you'll find variations of Bihari entering Bangla. Bihari, Hindi, even Shautal languages are coming in, which would, for instance, if you put someone from Purulia next to someone from Sylhet or Chattogram, they will not be understood mutually. Although strictly speaking, they are speaking the same language, Bangla, because of the pronunciation differences.
Okay, sir. Shonchita has raised her hand. Do we have time for another question?
Well, I don't eat dinner until much later, so we have plenty of time. About you, I can't say. Go ahead.
Okay, Shonchita, please.
That's very kind of you. That's very kind of you. So I would just like to add here that there are curious cases of sociolects as well, like dialects which are specific to social groups, which are within the same region. Certain social groups are having different pronunciations and vocabs and grammatical patterns. So I'm translating folk literature right now, and within the same geographical location, like that's a very small place that I am working on, but within the same geographical location, that is within the territory of one dialect, I can see that there is the existence of another sociolect used by another social community. Like one character is named as Dukhe. At one place, one village community is calling that boy as Dukhe, and there is another community of the boatmen, and they are calling the same boy as Duhe. So this ka sound, the velar sound, is being dropped. So that I would like to add here.
Yeah, absolutely. You are absolutely right. And again, I will emphasize the same thing. The same thing happens everywhere, right? In the United States, in the same area of, let's say, New York City, you will have people speaking received American English. And in the same area, you will have African Americans speaking something that is a totally different sociolect, as you call it. Same area, all right? And they're proud of it because they're speaking to themselves.
So, sir, right, as a translator, should I retain both the forms, like Dukhe and Duhe?
It's very simple. I've given you the principle. If it is in print, is it in print?
Yes, sir. Both Dukhe and Duhe, both are there in the text.
Then you have to retain both. And then you'll have to put a footnote that the boatmen are pronouncing the same name as this. Simple. But that gives the reader the cue that, okay, so there are different communities here in the same region, in the same territory. Very simple. That's not a problem at all. That often arises. For instance, it arises in Mahashweta Devi. You read Mahashweta Devi, you immediately have 2 or 3 languages masquerading as Bangla, right? Because the text is in Bangla. But then you have Shautal vocabulary coming in, sentences in Shautal, in Shautali language, perhaps. Some of the other people are speaking a Hindi-inflected Bangla, right? So now this becomes complicated. This actually is the most difficult translator's job. That is to say, how do you differentiate? So you have to choose a register for every such sociolect that marks it off as different from the narrative which might be in standard Bangla. Got it?
Yes. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sanchita. Now, sir, I come to one of our students. She also has a very interesting question, Ishrat. Ishrat, if you want to interact, because we have time.
Sure.
Ishrat, okay, I think I should read it out for her because she might be facing connectivity issues or something like that. Ishrat is asking, should we not use W as in Saraswati and instead use V for Bo as in Jalamukhi, as it is given in the list? Should we instead spell it as Saraswati with V?
Yeah. Now, this depends entirely on the nature of the source text. All right. Saraswati with a V, not a W, is Sanskrit. All right. So if you have, a situation where the source text demands a particular repeated, recurring use of the original Sanskrit word, then use V. All right. Otherwise, use W. Because again, remember, Saraswati is a name that is recognized, whether V or W, more or less across India, with perhaps the exception of certain northeastern states. So use W or V. It doesn't really matter so much. Similarly, Jwalamukhi, yeah, because see the principle I have applied over here is pertains only to this particular book. Your text doesn't have to follow this 100%. You create your own system of transliteration, but stand by it. Apply it uniformly. So Jwalamukhi can be JW. No problem there, because after all, in Bangla, it's spelt with the Bophala. Yeah. And that Bophala is silent. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Ishrat has thanked you. So now, with everyone's permission, I would like to ask a few things.
Of course.
No, I mean, I'm kind of probably misusing my position as an organizer, but I feel I can't resist the temptation here. Something that has always bothered or troubled me. What do we do when we are translating Bangla language, which is full of pun? I mean, I kept on thinking about this while thinking of translating one of my most favorite writers, Shibram. And I just would love to hear your take on this, sir. I mean, translating Shibram or someone who uses pun to that extent.
Yes. Actually speaking, Devaditto, you know what? Comedy, humor is actually sometimes more difficult to translate, because precisely for the reason that you point out, it is extremely localized. the impact will be understood only by that particular readership. So now, of course, if you want to and you should, why not? Just as people have translated Edward Lear into Bangla. Yeah. So why can't you do Shibram into English? So you must try to take it as a challenge. You must try to get as many of the puns out as possible. If you can't, it's all right. You did your best, but more often than not, the soft option is, especially if you have an academic publisher, then put it into a footnote. That the original is punning on this, and you explain the pun. It does not have to be more than one line because that's all you need. Just one sentence is fine.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you for that encouragement. Now I come to another question. We have a very interesting set of writings from 19th century. I'm particularly talking about ghost stories. I mean, ghost stories from England, America, where I came across sentences that were really, really long. And while translating, I had two observations. One was, if I break the sentences, যখন বাংলায় করছি আর কি, তখন ওগুলোকে ছোট ছোট বাক্যে যদি করে দিই, তাহলে কখনো কখনো মনে হচ্ছে একটা বিল্ড আপ তৈরি করা যাচ্ছে, বেশ একটা মানে রিডারদেরকে এনগেজ করে রাখার একটা বিল্ড আপ তৈরি করা যাচ্ছে। আবার কখনো মনে হচ্ছে যে না, ওই বড় বাক্যটা, লং ড্রন সেন্টেন্সটার হয়তো ইংলিশ রিডারশিপের কাছে একটা আলাদা অ্যাপিল ছিল, সেটা কি আমি কোথাও হারিয়ে ফেলছি? সো মাই কোয়েশ্চেন উড বি, যে ক্ষেত্রে আমরা এই ধরনের বিশেষ কিছু লেখা পাচ্ছি যেখানে মানে আই কুড বি কমপ্লিটলি রং, বাট ভূতের গল্প বা সাসপেন্স স্টোরি, এইগুলোর ক্ষেত্রে যেখানে ল্যাঙ্গুয়েজ একটা পুরো পরিবেশ তৈরি করছে, একটা অ্যাটমসফেরিক এফেক্ট হয়তো কোথাও গিয়ে তৈরি হচ্ছে রিডারশিপের ওপর, সেক্ষেত্রে কি সেন্টেন্সের দৈর্ঘ্যটা রেখে দেওয়াই ভালো, নাকি ছোট ছোট বাক্যে ভেঙে করাটা ভালো? আই উড অলসো স্পেসিফিক্যালি refer about Lovecraft, translating Lovecraft into Bangla.
No, this is something that repeatedly occurs in translation. And again, it is your call. I agree with you that for stories of, spiritual in the supernatural sense, or occult, sometimes the original author is deliberately doing it to create the atmosphere, in which case you should also do the same. And let me tell you this, which you know already, বাংলাতে ওরকম কোনো প্রবলেম হয় না, কারণ বাংলাতে বাক্য চলতেই পারে। It doesn't really necessitate you having to break it up into different sentences. I know what you're saying, impactটা হবে। তুমি তো বাংলার কথা বলছো, মানে ইংরেজি থেকে বাংলা, তাই তো? কিন্তু তুমি এটা কেন ভাবছো, কারণটা আমি বলি। তুমি বোধহয় আজকালকার পাঠকের কথাই ভাবছো, whose attention spans are limited. But why are you thinking of this? Why not try to and say this introduction, in your introduction, that I have tried to retain the atmosphere created by the original author through the use of long sentences. If you're convinced that that is the reason, তাহলে তোমার রাখা উচিত। বাংলাতে তো এরকম কোনো অসুবিধা হয়নি। You can go back, রবীন্দ্রনাথের লেখা, বিভূতিভূষণের লেখা, অনেকেরই লেখা কিন্তু চলছেই চলছে, একটা বাক্য চলছে। That has never affected our impression of them, has it? On the contrary, it has created something which you are trying to recreate now. এটাও সত্যি, in the 19th century in English, people used to also write longer sentences. But that should not be the reason. That is not the primary reason. The primary reason is if you think that there is an atmospheric being created, then you should also try to recreate it.
একদম একদম ধন্যবাদ। নন্দিনী দি জাস্ট একটা খুব সুন্দর কমেন্ট করেছেন। উনি শক্তি চট্টোপাধ্যায়ের একটা লাইন, ভাত মানে অন্ন, গন্ধ মানে বাস, এটির কথা বলে বলছেন যে ওয়ার্ড প্লে কখনো কখনো খুব ডিফিকাল্ট হয়ে দাঁড়ায় ট্রান্সলেট করা।
Correct.
So I think we actually have exhausted our repertoire of questions for the evening, but I can totally see that you are more than happy to go on. But I guess every good thing has to come to a close, at least for that time being. But I was overjoyed. Now I come to the Thanksgiving part. I think these days, doing translation, reading translation, both are facing a very, I don't know if I may use the word unlikely, but the challenge is very much out there probably. The challenge of dhoirjohinata. We as readers have lost our patience to a great extent. And one of your ex-students, I'm sure there were at least a couple of your ex-students here. One of them, a very dear friend of mine, he had to just leave because he was traveling. But he just informed me, who is also a practicing translator, he just informed me যে আজকের আলোচনাটা শুনে আমি বুঝলাম যে আমার ধৈর্যটা কত কম এর আগে কাজ করেছে এবং ওটাকে আরো বেশি করে অ্যাক্টিভেট করতে হবে। So I just quoted him, and I think the most important lesson that today's session gave us is that the importance of being patient, importance of taking the challenge while translating, while reading translations. And I know, sir, your the vastness of your knowledge would have enriched us more. And I don't know if you will agree to do a session in future, sparing some time for us, but I think we will probably nag you a bit for doing that. Coming up with more creative ideas, because I have come across certain situations where I have found that actually the person answering the questions is not running short of answers. We, the persons who are asking questions, have run out of questions. Because probably it's not finding the answer, but asking the right question that matters. And as I said, we have exhausted our repertoire of questions for the evening. But we will try to...
You're most welcome to anyone who wants to ask a specific question to me. Are most welcome to email me. I'm always willing to help.
I'll share your email ID with everyone, and we will come up with more creative queries and more creative occasions to invite you for sharing your knowledge with us. And we thank you from the bottom of our heart for doing this. It was a fantastic and enriching session. And again, probably I am joining words that can hardly be joined, but if I am to give a one-line response, this session taught us how to dream responsibly. I don't know if we can dream responsibly, but we, the people who have joined here, I know most of us here are aspiring translators. And as one of those who have just started their journey, I think a translator is a dreamer. And you just taught a bunch of dreamers how to dream responsibly. That's all I can say.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your kind words. And I'm always there to help.
Thank you, sir.